Hello and thanks for watching. In this video, you will learn about the nitrogen cycle and some of the pathways that nitrogen can use to cycle through Earth. Nitrogen is another example of a type of matter that cycles through the biosphere. Nitrogen is matter because it is an atom that can be found on the periodic table. It takes up space and it has mass. Nitrogen is very important for living things because it is an important part of building DNA and making proteins that make cells. Nitrogen gas is plentiful in our air, and it is actually a molecule of two nitrogen atoms put together. Just like oxygen gas, nitrogen atoms don't like floating around by themselves, so they are in pairs and are written as N2. Did you know that the air we breathe is actually 78% nitrogen? It's true. You may have thought that our air is mostly oxygen, but only 21% of the air we breathe is oxygen. With so much nitrogen gas in the air, you'd think it would be easy for plants and animals to get the nitrogen that they need, right? Well, it's actually not that simple. The nitrogen gas found in the air is actually not usable by plants and animals, so we can't get it just by breathing in. So how do we get it? Nitrogen is matter that cycles through the biosphere, which is why we call it the nitrogen cycle. 78% of our air is nitrogen, but there is also nitrogen gas in the soil. Soil does have space for air, and also when it rains or snows, that can bring nitrogen from the atmosphere with it and put it in the soil. So with there being nitrogen gas in the soil, what happens next involves something called nitrogen-fixing bacteria. You may find these bacteria on the roots of certain plants in these little white bumps called nodules. Now, not every plant has nodules like this. They grow on plants called legumes. This includes clover, beans, peas, alfalfa, peanuts, and some trees. The bacteria live inside the nodules attached to the roots. These bacteria are called nitrogen-fixing bacteria. What they do is take in the nitrogen gas in the soil, and they turn it into other molecules that have nitrogen plus hydrogen or oxygen or both. We can call these molecules nitrogen compounds. These new nitrogen compounds are taken in and used by the plants to make DNA and proteins. Hooray! To summarize, this process is called nitrogen fixation or nitrification. This process takes place when nitrogen-fixing bacteria on the roots of plants take in nitrogen gas from the soil and fix the nitrogen, or combine it with other atoms to form nitrogen compounds, which are a form of nitrogen that plants can use. Once the nitrogen is inside of plants, animals can get the nitrogen that they need from eating those plants. But what about other plants that don't have nodules of bacteria on the roots? How do they get nitrogen? For plants that do not have nitrogen-fixing bacteria, they can still get their nitrogen as long as nitrogen compounds are put into the soil. Nitrogen can get into the soil in a few different ways. Animals help put nitrogen that plants need in the soil. When animals go to the bathroom and release waste, that waste contains a lot of nitrogen and other nutrients that are really great for plants. So that animal waste can be mixed with the soil and is a rich source of nitrogen and other nutrients for plants. This is why farmers will actually mix cow manure into the soil on purpose before they plant crops because it is so rich in nutrients. Also, dead things are great for soil too. Do you remember what the organisms are that break down the bodies of dead plants and animals? Those would be decomposers. Decomposers include bacteria and fungi, like mold and mushrooms. The bacteria that live in the soil of a field would break down the dead plants and animals into nutrients and put those nutrients, like nitrogen compounds, back into the soil. From here, plants can take in those nitrogen compounds and other nutrients to grow healthy and strong. So this nitrogen cycle is supposed to be a cycle, right? We looked at how nitrogen gas from the air can get into the soil, go into nitrogen-fixing bacteria, and get bonded with other atoms to form nitrogen compounds. From there, it can go into plants and animals that eat those plants and back into the soil again through decomposers and continue in that loop from plants to animals to soil forever. But how does it cycle back to being in the air to actually make it a cycle? Here is where another type of bacteria comes in. These are called denitrifying bacteria because they do the opposite of the nitrifying or nitrogen-fixing bacteria. They take in those nitrogen compounds in the soil and break apart those bonds, and they release nitrogen gas back into the soil, which can then go back into the air. Now we have finished our cycle. Here is an image that represents the nitrogen cycle. Pause this video and take a minute or two to examine it and see how nitrogen can cycle through the biosphere in some different pathways. YouTube also has some good videos for kids to explain the nitrogen cycle if you need more information.